everyone, this is Jake Wynn with the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, continuing on our On Tour video series from South Mountain Battlefield in Maryland. We have moved from Fox's Gap itself along the Sharpsburg Road near the Wise Cabin. We've moved about 1,000 yards to the south to the border of field and trees where Ohioans and North Carolinians were fighting on September 14th, 1862. In fact, just over my shoulder is a monument to the North Carolina troops that fought here at South Mountain on the 14th. We're going to be talking about a member of the United States Army who was wounded here, arguably one of the most famous of the soldiers who is wounded here, although he's not famous during the 1862 battle, but will gain fame about a decade and a half later. He is going to go on to become a United States president. We are going to be talking about Lieutenant Colonel Rutherford B. Hayes of the 23rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry. He is leading men in the 9th Corps of the U.S. Army up the slopes of South Mountain. He is going to be deployed during the morning of September 14th, 1862. His unit is going to be thrown into the fray here, again, against North Carolina troops. And Hayes is going to fall wounded. And so we're going to follow through, look through Hayes' wounding, his experience here at South Mountain, and ultimately the medical care that is going to be administered to him, which is going to be a little different. Not necessarily on the battlefield, but once he is evacuated back to Middletown, Maryland, his medical care, because he is an officer, is going to be a bit different than the enlisted men like Sergeant Tisdale that we talked about just a bit ago in a previous video. It's going to be different. So we'll talk about the differences there in an upcoming video. But first we have to wound Rutherford B. Hayes. So let's walk through his day on September 14th, 1862. So he is Lieutenant Colonel of the 23rd Ohio. Fun fact, there is another future president who is among the ranks of this unit. That would be William McKinley, who is a commissary sergeant in the 23rd Ohio. So he is also here in Maryland during this campaign. He's going to have a monument dedicated to him at Antietam National Battlefield for bringing coffee and sandwiches to the unit under fire on September 17th, 1862. Hayes is not going to make it to Antietam because he is going to get shot in the field just behind the camera, just on the eastern slopes of the South Mountain Range. Hayes led his Ohioans into battle at 9 a.m. on September 14th, attacking against the southern flank of Confederate forces here in Fox's Gap. He wrote, quote, "I feared confusion, exhorted, swore, and threatened his troops," Hayes wrote after his regiment's arrival on this battlefield in relative disarray, which is pretty common for this battlefield. You hear that a lot in accounts among the U.S. Army forces fighting here because of the nature of the terrain. To get here, you had to go through some pretty rough terrain, ravines, trees, woodlots. Made it pretty difficult to get onto this battlefield long before you actually went into combat itself. Shortly after giving the command for his unit to advance towards the North Carolinians behind me, Hayes is going to be wounded. He says, quote, "I felt a stunning blow and found a musket ball had struck my left arm just below the elbow." He describes what happens next, his initial reactions to this stunning blow, and subsequently what he does in his diary. He says, quote, "Fearing that an artery might be cut, I asked a soldier near me to tie my handkerchief above the wound. I soon felt weak, faint, and sick at the stomach. I laid down and was pretty comfortable. I was perhaps 20 feet behind the line of my men and could form a pretty accurate notion of the way the fight was going. The enemy's fire was occasionally very heavy. Balls passed near my face and hit the ground all around me. I could see wounded men staggering or carried to the rear. But I felt sure our men were holding their own. I listened anxiously to hear the approach of reinforcements, wondered they did not come." Hayes had fallen wounded. He's stranded helplessly between Union and Confederate lines for about 20 minutes when all of a sudden the shooting begins to cease. Hayes called back towards his unit now behind him, and he says, "Hello, 23rd men, are you going to leave your colonel here for the enemy?" Amid a renewed musketry fire as men race forward to try to pick up their wounded leader, He is ultimately going to be rescued from the front lines. He's going to be taken down the hill to a division field hospital towards the town of Middletown, just about a mile or two off this battlefield. There, he is going to be cared for by his brother-in-law and the regimental surgeon of the 23rd Ohio, Dr. Joseph Webb, who dresses his gunshot wound and administered opium, again, painkiller available widely during the Civil War, and also gave him alcohol, likely brandy or whiskey, as a stimulant to deal with the shock of the fact that Hayes had just been wounded, shot in the arm here on the top of South Mountain. An ambulance ultimately evacuated Hayes from the front lines, from the hospital just down the hill from the front lines, to Middletown, Maryland, where he's going to receive his next care. Again, going into the system being developed by Jonathan Letterman, that ambulance system, evacuation system that is going to see Hayes brought off the front lines to a field dressing station, next to a field hospital, and then further back to the rear for more advanced medical care. Hayes is going to be taken into the village of Middletown, where he is going to be taken into the home of Jacob Rudy. We're going to talk a little bit more about Rudy's experience when we go into Middletown itself in an upcoming video in this series. So we'll pick up the story of Hayes and of Tisdale of the 35th Massachusetts when we get into Middletown itself. But this is going to conclude our kind of battlefield portion of this on-tour series. This battle, just to kind of finish out the narrative here, this is a victory for the United States forces. The United States Army is going to be victorious here. They achieved their objective of pushing Confederate forces off of this mountaintop, making them retreat further to the west towards the Potomac River. And this puts Robert E. Lee and his Confederate forces in a really rough spot on September 15th, the day after this battle, because Lee's forces are scattered all over the Maryland and Virginia countrysides. Part of his army is besieging Harper's Ferry. Other parts of the army are heading north towards the Pennsylvania border, north of Hagerstown. And suddenly, Robert E. Lee realizes that he has an entire massive force, likely in excess of 100,000 men of the U.S. Army, bearing down on him. And so in the aftermath of this battle, of the defeat for the Confederate forces here at South Mountain, Lee is going to pull his forces back together and is going to make a stand on the western banks of Antietam Creek, near the town of Sharpsburg, Maryland. And 3 days after this battle, on September 17, 1862, the Battle of Antietam will break out. The bloodiest 12 hours in American history, 23,000 casualties in 12 hours of combat, among them 17,000 wounded soldiers. That battle is going to eclipse what happens here on South Mountain. This was a strategically important battle, a victory that the Union forces could point to as an important success leading into the Battle of Antietam. But this fight is going to be overshadowed by the bloodletting that will occur just a few miles west of here. A further test on the medical systems of these armies to care for those 17,000 wounded. Jonathan Letterman, on the staff of General George McClellan, is going to be overseeing that care for the U.S. Army forces and for captured Confederates at Antietam from the Pry House on the Antietam battlefield, now operated by the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, the Pry House Field Hospital Museum. So if you want to go to the site like South Mountain, you can come here and visit this battlefield. Highly recommended. It's a beautiful place and one where you can get a good understanding of what the terrain did to these soldiers. To have to fight over a mountain pass was incredibly difficult during the Civil War. And even walking around, there's a reason the Appalachian Trail goes through here. There are some pretty difficult pieces of terrain to navigate on top of South Mountain. You can come here and visit this, and then you can go off to the Pry House Field Hospital Museum, and you can get a Letterman eye view of what the battlefield at Antietam was like, and part of this medical revolution that Jonathan Letterman is launching. So highly recommend to come out to this battlefield and to Antietam Battlefield, visit the Pry House and the National Museum of Civil War Medicine to get a fuller idea of these stories. So that's going to bring an end, like I said, to the battlefield portion of our videos today. We're going to examine in future videos in this series, we're going to look at the medical care, the next steps in places like Middletown and Burkittsville and Frederick, Maryland, and follow some of these patients as their medical care advances and along the lines of the Letterman plan, the Letterman system. If you enjoyed this video, give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel. You can do that in the lower right-hand side of your screen. You'll get more videos prompted get a notification when we post a new video. And become a member of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. You'll be supporting a nonprofit organization. You get lots of cool perks as well, but you get the knowledge that you're supporting videos and content like this. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.